Welcome to the Your Message Received podcast. And now, taking your message to the finish line, your host, John Duffin.
Hey folks, John Duffin here from Duffin Media. Welcome back to another episode of Your Message Received. Your Message Received is the home, the platform to help you find your best, your most true, your most authentic voice. Get what you want, find what you need, improve results, increase sales, meet the person of your dreams, make $1 billion. Not quite so sure about those last two. I can't guarantee those last two, but all the other stuff I feel good about. And look, the whole purpose, the whole point, why we are here, if we can get you to a place where you are speaking a little more true, a little more authentically, and it's your most authentic voice, then we've done our job. Keep liking, keep listening, keep sharing, and you keep finding us on iHeartMedia, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and a bunch of other places. And as we have also launched more into the video platform, you will find us also on YouTube as well. And we are thrilled to be back. And folks, that commitment of getting you to a place where you're more authentic and true faster, how do we do it? We do it by bringing people on who have taken journeys that will get you there. That to me is the secret. That's the rub here, is that we're lucky enough to find people that have walked the walk, have taken the path, and have no problem with sharing it with us. So we get that privilege today. Again, Sean Macmillen is our guest, and I'm very excited about this as well. And folks, the end of the path, I'll start with first, where I met Sean, a boiling hot weekend, but it seems like now on the East Coast, they're all that way. So it's just whatever. It was a hot weekend where a bunch of, I'm calling them yahoos, we're going to run 30 consecutive hours. And I'm like, oh, interesting. Following a person that I'm a nuts fan of. His name is Charlie Engle. God bless you, Charlie, if you're listening today. Sean, welcome to the show, man. It is great to have you here.
Thanks, John. It's definitely an honor to be here.
So, folks, I got the chance to run alongside Sean slowly. Not Sean. Sean was kind enough to slow his pace a bit when I would come staggering over. But we were running on behalf of the Ashley Treatment Centers. And Sean, what got you to sign up for that run?
But it really starts back in about 2016 when I first got connected with Charlie Engle and Pam Rickard, who was working for Herren Project, and then David Clark. But I started following Charlie and became friends with him. And as the years progressed, I knew that Charlie always celebrated his recovery by running the number of hours that he was turning sober. But every year, there was a conflict and I wasn't able to make it. And this year, Charlie put it out there that he was doing 30 hours for 30 years at Ashley Treatment, and there was no conflict. And fortunately, I didn't have to go from Pennsylvania to New York or to North Carolina. So it was, it was a perfect opportunity for me to get down there, and also to, part of it was partnering with Herren Project, so to get to represent the Herren Project. So I jumped at the chance to get down there and do it with Charlie and meet a lot of just truly fantastic people.
It's crazy to think like how paths cross, and in the sense that we'll walk back a little bit. So I'm realizing, and Sean can fill in the holes for me. I mean, look, there would be a great chance, in my limited beliefs, we'll say, that there would be a great chance we probably wouldn't know each other or get the privilege of getting to know each other, hearing stories, if it wasn't for this specific instance. And I always find it's fascinating. It's not like our backgrounds were exactly the same or we walked the paths. Look, so going back as well too, I find it fascinating. Sean's got some military in him, and I mean specific military, and a lot of it as well too. So walking back, you came from a military family, right?
Yes, my grandfather, Pappy Mac, was Army Air Corps during World War II. He's, I think, got 2 Purple Hearts. Then my father was Air Force during Vietnam, and then coming out of college, I went into the Army as a 2nd lieutenant, and then served 12 years in the infantry. So I've got deployments to Bosnia, I've been to Pakistan, I've been to Jordan, and then I did 3 combat tours in Afghanistan.
I love the line in your social media page. I liked Afghanistan so much I did it 3 times. Because I've only heard delightful things about that. Speaking of hot. But what I was going to ask you is, growing up, was that a dream of yours, or was that some sort of an expectation from your family that that's where you would naturally head?
Actually, I think it was quite the opposite. There was definitely not an expectation that we follow the military lines. As a matter of fact, because of my father's experiences in Vietnam, the last thing he wanted me to do was to go in the Army.
Okay.
I really didn't know much about him or my grandfather's experiences because they just didn't talk about it. And honestly, in high school, I was the guy who avoided the Army recruiter. I dodged him and all the other recruiters. But as I entered college, part of it was I didn't know what I wanted to do. But our neighbor twins were both had gone through ROTC and going into the Army, and I thought, and it was appealing to me a little bit more. And so I went into ROTC and the Pennsylvania National Guard. I can't say my parents were exactly thrilled about it, but like I said, because of my dad's experiences, but they were supportive, and then that launched my Army career from there.
That's exactly what I wanted to ask you, which was the level of support, not the level of support, the level of enthusiasm going in. But right. You said something earlier, and I grew up in a blue collar background, which is not a military background, and I'm not comparing the two things. But you did say something as well that resonated, like in regards to the specifics as it related to your dad and your grandfather. You're like, they just didn't talk about it. Was that the way? Like, I'm always curious in regards to homes like that. In our home like that, there certainly wasn't a lot of feelings being brought up or emotions being brought up. What was it like in your house growing up in terms of the communication?
It was exactly the same.
You were communicated with.
But because my father had moved on to be a policeman then, so, but and growing up in rural Pennsylvania added to that. But we didn't talk about feelings in my family. We did not talk about emotions. We didn't talk about any of that stuff. You were basically allowed to be hungry or angry, and that was about it. And I just it was one of those, like, big boys don't cry. You want something to cry, I'll give you something to cry about.
Oh, I've heard that.
Rub some dirt on it, get back out there, put some duct tape on it, wrap it in electrical tape. We're not going to the ER. And that's just, it was just, we didn't talk. There was no feelings in my house.
All right. God, so not enthusiastic, but in supportive. And now you're off to the Army. You make the call, you make the decision, and follow a couple of neighbors. Christ, I followed a couple of neighbors, but in terms of my 8th grade kids to go to a prep school, you choose to go into the military, and you were there for, you said 12 years?
12 years, yep.
Yeah. I'm not going to ask you to walk me through 12 years. That's not fair to you. But the fact of the matter, what I would say is this. What was your first realization when you were there that, like, oh my God, I'm really here?
I don't, I did not find it scary at all, whether, just going into the Army basic training or even, going through schools like Ranger School, because they didn't have anything on my father. My father scared me more than the Army did. I mean, so, it was, so it wasn't too bad. I think really what the feeling that comes to mind is, as I, was in these leadership positions,
Right.
is I felt more like an imposter. Like, oh my God, I'm not good enough to be a leader.
Mm-hmm.
That was more the feeling that I had, that I wasn't good enough to be an Army leader, and people are trusting me with their sons' lives. I'm not
Right.
sure I'm up to this.
How did you get yourself up to it?
A lot of great mentors, just doing it and building the confidence. But the feeling was always still there that I wasn't as good as this company commander. Or how do I get to this? And it was still always an underlying feeling that was kind of in there, that somehow I didn't belong, but I could pretend, if I pretended long enough, that I would belong. But I think a lot of it just came with doing it and having the confidence, and seeing that people would follow me or listen.
They tended to, and obviously,
Yeah.
it's if you're giving orders, they're not debates, and they're not suggestions. I get that, but you were noticing that people were, following you, even in spite of, in your head, you're thinking, I'm not the leader, I shouldn't be here, but they're still following you anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's, there's always the rank and authority that comes with the positions, but I also wasn't a dictator. I didn't lead like that. I always asked for input, because I knew that I wasn't the smartest guy in the room, and that there were other people who had a lot more experience than I did, to lean on them to kind of help my decision making.
That's pretty great to know at a young age, that you're not the smartest person in the room. That so often you felt like you had. If it was me, that I felt like I had to be, and that imposter syndrome that I have in common with you. Sadly, I don't wish that on you. Is that sense of, it's like, well, then I'm going to have to pretend. For me, then I would have to pretend I was the smartest person in the room. I love your tactic of knowing that you're not the smartest person in the room, because very few people are. That's the thing. That's nothing in terms of a judgment. It's like, well, then get somebody. I don't want to be the smartest person in the room. I want somebody here that can help me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And cope, though, is what I was curious about. How did you cope as this is going on?
Just stuffed a lot of it. Didn't talk about it. Didn't mention it. It was just one of those, just keep burying it deep, because I was also very type A, very perfectionistic, that just, looked like I had it all together.
Yeah.
And that was, just, keep pressing forward like that, because because if I told somebody I was feeling that way, who's going to listen to me then? But I just, but it was just a lot of stuffing of it. But as my career continued, and the deployments piled up, my way of coping with it was pouring booze on it, and just pouring more and more and more, and that was my way of just numbing it out.
So when you are in these life and death situations, and now you're pouring booze on top of the decision making and the doubt and the stuff and all the stuff inside, how did that play out in regards to, obviously you got home, which is great. How did it play out for you there? I mean, especially like I know of one other person. I may know more, but I can recall of one other person that was in Afghanistan, and they were in for at least 2 tours. That wasn't the 3 that you were there, but at least twice. And they are still suffering. And I can only out them on that because they bring it up all the time and they post about it. So it's, how did it manifest? Like all this is going on. How did it manifest, especially there?
Over there, when I was in Afghanistan, I didn't drink.
Okay.
I didn't sleep much either. Uh, it was just more stuff. It didn't. I think a lot of it is when I was deployed, I didn't have time to think about it.
Okay.
It was more concerned with, yeah, was there a lot of downtime? So it was either going to the gym, watching movies,
hmm
trying to sleep, or I was just so engrossed in work of, making sure that we were doing everything right and keeping people alive.
Yeah.
It didn't really manifest itself until I would hit back in the States, and because technically, we weren't supposed to drink overseas. I know people got it because the other countries we work with drank, but that was something I didn't do. But as soon as I hit back on U.S. soil, it was,
Boom.
it was game on.
So what was that like? So you're with your family and friends. Are they right? I mean, or are you in another place? Are you basically back home when you're coming back to the States for these breaks?
Yeah, yeah. I came back home, wreaked havoc with my family. Always lied on every post-deployment health survey about how I was feeling, because after being gone for that long, the first thing I wanted to do was go spend time with my family, go on vacation, take my leave. I didn't want to go see the psychiatrist or the social worker,
Mhm.
or, that label or that stigma of, hey, look, the boss is falling apart at the seams. So, I would lie on every survey. Oh, nope, 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 everything's fine. And, I think that the challenge is, and this I think happens to a lot of military. My family, my wife and my son expected the same person to come home.
Mhm.
I expected the same person to come home, and we're going to pick up where we left off beforehand, and things were totally different.
So you're saying there's a son now at this point. So when you're coming back, there's a wife and a son.
Yes.
How old is your son? As this is now, nope, nope, all that, right? When you're just like locked into a role.
Yeah, because the first time I deployed, he was 7 days old, so he doesn't
Wow.
remember that. I was only going for a short period of time. Then the second time, he would have been 7 years old, so he kind of, he remembers that. So, but then, he's getting to be about 9 or 10 years old. So not
Okay.
only is the deployment, so it's getting harder for him to watch dad leave.
hmm
And then it's even harder for him when I come home, because I'm just, I'm an asshole when I
Right.
come home,
Right.
because I, I honestly felt more comfortable in Afghanistan than I did being home,
Okay.
because those guys who I just spent 8, 9 months with
hmm
in the sandbox, getting shot at, had to trust with my life every day. I felt closer to them than I did my own family. A lot of people don't understand that, but and he didn't understand why. And then when I was home, that I wasn't doing anything with him. I was working or I was drinking,
Right.
and that was it. And may have been physically present as a father, but I was not psychologically there at all.
Did you know then that this was a problem?
I think deep down I did, because every deployment it was a little bit more, and I started breaking all the rule and my wife's rules of no more drinking during the week, no more than 2 beers. And I was, that's when the sneaking it, hiding it, lying about it, all those things that I said, oh, I'm not going to do that. That's what problem, and I could still just say, well, I'm just a problem drinker.
hmm
uh and then, but it just, I think deep down I knew it was a problem, but I was always taught to be very independent, strong-willed, deal with it on your own. We can stop this.
And I heard you correctly. You said those were your wife's rules. They weren't your rules.
Well, a lot of them were her rules, because she was very concerned,
Well, yeah.
because I was just, I was wreaking havoc. in the family. You know, on the outside, we looked like the perfect family. On our cul-de-sac, we had the biggest house, we had the nicest cars, we had the biggest yard, we had the 2 dogs. We didn't have the white picket fence. Ours was chain link. But, you know, we had all that. But on the inside, it was chaos.
Yeah.
But most people didn't know that. And, you know, she was covering for me, and, you know, I was doing I'm going to change, I'm going to fix it. But a lot of it was her rules, but some of it was like, well, you know, I'll know it's a problem when I do this. And because of, you know, it was like, you know, because I always drank beer, but then all of a sudden I found myself drinking hard liquor because liquor's quicker and it was easier to hide, and I didn't have to pee all the time. You know?
Funny. For me, I remember I drank hard liquor because others did, and I would gleefully follow along. I'm not saying it was their issue or fault, but I would follow what others were doing. And so it's like, oh, that looks like fun, I'll do it too. My problem, and for me, my rules when I was wreaking havoc in a different, like my rules, I had a million of them and I broke them all. That's the only reason I was asking, like, who's, you know what I'm saying? Like, it didn't even matter for me. My rules were, okay, no more Crown Royal, no more Ouzo, no more, because I would either be face first in, you know, like I remember being face first in a restaurant bar, literally fell off a chair seated and hit the floor. Or, you know, embarrassing myself for all that stuff. And my rules then became a bunch of rules that I broke every single one of them, you know, but, and so that's the only reason I was asking.
Yeah. And, you know, some of that, even going back, as you talked about being a follower.
Yeah.
You know, from day one for me in the military is drinking was at every social event. It was kind of expected. So for a while, it was even hard to figure out, do I really have a problem? Because I'm hanging out with people who drink just like me.
Yeah.
But then when I started to, well, I'm not going to drink during the weekday. I won't drink during the work. You know, I'll only drink this much at night. I'll only drink beer. I'll only.
Oh my God, they're all mine.
You know, I won't drink. I won't drink in the morning. But you know, all those rules. I had 1,000 of them. I broke them all pretty quickly, and then I would just establish new rules, and then I would break them.
Yeah, I included. Let's see. I'll work out before I go. I'll be the last one to arrive at the party. I'll be the first to leave at the party. I'll eat pasta before because that'll absorb more. And eventually, toward the end, for me, it was beer and wine only because I can handle that, and those were my rules until I couldn't.
I think
right. You know, you like I said, and we were talking about follower. You have a lot of years now in as a leader or a perceived leader. It's also sounding like the only one that didn't believe it at times was you. So you're in the role of a leader, and then you get the chance to escape and a lot of good excuses that are in your camp, right?
Yeah.
So you leave the military.
Right.
Then what do you do?
I actually moved back to Pennsylvania. And my wife and son were back in central Pennsylvania, and I got hired. I was teaching ROTC at Kutztown University, Lehigh University, and Penn State Berks. So I ended up as a geographic bachelor, which was not real good for. It was really good for my drinking career.
I was going to say that. Oh, there you go. So you're by yourself and no one there to wag their finger at you or to tell you you're a problem and all that stuff. And let me guess, and you can hang on for a stretch when you were teaching, or could you not? You know.
Initially, I could, but then it was. Then it imploded very quickly and rapidly. You know, because I was a professional. I'd drink 2 or 3 beers on my way to run PT with them.
Mhm.
I would run 4 or 5 miles, outrun the college kids. Then I would drink 4 or 5 more beers on the way home, have a couple shower beers, and then work the rest of the day.
I'm sorry, you had a couple,
Shower beers,
and they are.
beers you drink in the shower.
I love that. Folks, pay close attention in terms of grooming hygiene. Shower, shave, couple of beers. You're a very clean person, apparently, if you have time for a couple of beers. Nice. But so what was the lowest point in your mind in terms of the path downward? Literally the old cliche, hitting bottom. What was, do you remember it?
Oh, there were so many. 2007, there was a suicide attempt after my 3rd trip back from Afghanistan, but that probably, I think I had, racked up in late 2008, early 2009.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't even consider those low points at that point. I had 5 DUIs. One of them was, some of them were a week apart. Some of them I didn't even remember how I got back home. Cops would drop me off back home, or I'd wake up in the hospital. Have no idea what had happened, and eventually ended up going to spend almost a year in Berks County Prison.
Okay.
And that was pretty low. But the judge there, still remember, he said, "Hey, you don't belong here. How about we get you to the Coatesville VA for treatment?" And that's where I ended up. I spent 2 weeks in the substance abuse treatment unit before spending 3 months in the inpatient PTSD unit.
Okay.
So realistically, that, from January 2011 until, finished PTSD program was the longest I had been without booze. But I still wasn't ready to listen to people.
I got it. Right. So if you break free is not exactly the choice of words I wanted, but you're released. You're released, and you are technically free. So what do you do?
At that point, my wife and I were still working on reconciling.
Okay.
And, I came back. So yeah, that would have been May 2010. Decided to go back to school, and the marriage was still pretty rocky because, I didn't know why nobody trusted me. But I was, still, I had gone back to school and for a degree in health science. Instead of being a drunk butthead, I was just a butthead who wanted to drink, which probably made me a bigger butthead.
Yes. Oh my God. Yup. Because you're being cheated or deprived or punished somehow.
So that was, so we ended up, it was a pretty nasty divorce, and I was miserable. I had done some work on my mental health, but apparently not enough. And it just, so that got really ugly. And I, ended up going back, eventually, got divorced, went into school, was still going through school, still staying dry. I was just white knuckling it until, May 2012, I white knuckled it enough and celebrated a 4.0 in college I still, to this day, can't even really describe how I ended up back in the liquor store, and I was back to the races again. And actually I ended up, what's that?
For how long?
That one was actually a pretty short run, because I have some friends of mine who are still baffled because I ended up doing a 12-mile Tough Mudder out in the Poconos, just blasted.
So the running stuff has permeated, and it sounds as the way you've described it. So because you've been fit and fitness has mattered to you, that you were able to still pull this stuff off, including the mutter hammered. You're able to do that. So that was a part of you going through.
Actually, right? that part of the fitness journey didn't start until May 2010 ish, because let's see. I left the Army in 2008 at 165 pounds.
Okay.
I came out of the Berks County Prison in 2009 at 240 pounds.
Okay. And how long was that? I mean, so to climb 80 pounds ish, how long was that? Because you caught a break and they got you out to go to Coastville.
So that was over the course of basically a year that I put on.
In a single year, you jump, and I'm guessing it wasn't all muscle, or it wasn't. Okay, right.
No, it didn't. It never occurred to me that I had to keep buying bigger jeans, and that even continued after I came out of prison. That my waist went from like 32 to 42, and it really didn't even occur to me until I had to go see the nutritionist, because I was pissed off at the VA because they had me on a low-fat diet. I'm like, this food tastes like crap. And she's the one who pointed out how much weight I had gained, and I was like, oh. And then I started seeing pictures of myself next to my son, and I was like, my God, who is this fat guy?
Right. Dad.
So I started hiding out in my parents' garage so nobody would see me at 5 a.m. and started working out, and eventually lost 86 pounds. And that began my fitness career. And then I started seeing my friends doing this thing called trail running here in Pennsylvania, and I kind of caught the bug. So that's where my fitness took off again, kind of.
But take me to the end of the path of, if you don't mind, take me to the end of the path where now it's time to make a pivotal decision. You were saying there's multiple times where you hit bottom. I'm not sure. Give me the one, and even if it wasn't a big deal, the one where it's like, okay, we got to do something different here.
That would have been after. So I went to treatment a couple more times. Actually, the one that got me was that really I relapsed. It was almost exactly 3 years ago. I had a little over 7 years of sobriety, and I relapsed, and I went on a run. I ended up with a felony DUI.
Wow.
Lost my job, and I went to treatment at Herren. Came out and relapsed again. My mental health was going to crap, and I was trying to figure out how to get back into Coatesville. And the one that got my attention there was another suicide attempt. But fortunately, I was saved. I was pissed that I was saved. I was just miserable. I didn't know how to live, didn't want to live. But I did go back to Coatesville, and but that was probably my low point as far as getting into recovery.
Thank you. When did you realize that I did want to live?
I think when I got to the Coatesville VA, and I was back in around veterans, and ironically, it had been 10 years since I'd been there. I was in the same room that I was in 10 years ago.
Wow.
And I think that was kind of those messages that I had shut out from, what I call my higher power, that I had tuned out.
Okay. But now you're starting to listen.
Now I'm starting to listen, and I realized that I had a lot of unresolved issues from Afghanistan that were still haunting me, that I thought I had fixed, and that wasn't the case.
So is this the first point, or the maybe not the best point, the first point where you realize all that stuffing, so to speak, whether it coming from your family, we didn't talk about feelings, emotions. We just didn't. And then you were talking about on the tours and all that stuff. I just stuffed, or I medicated. Is this now the realization that you don't have to do that?
That realization came to me that I didn't have to live like that, that there was a better way.
Mhm.
And the realization that, because I'm a 12-step guy, that I didn't really necessarily do a thorough fourth and fifth step, and that I had backed away from my step work and working with my sponsor, and that I had a lot more work to do in that as well. So I had a lot of aha moments in a very short period of time before COVID had pretty much shut down the program.
So this is happening then 2019?
No, yeah, well,
you're saying before COVID shut down the program. So I'm just thinking.
So I went to Karen in late 2019, and came back in January. But I went to Coatesville in like the 1st of March 2020 is when I got to Coatesville.
My birthday. Love that. So you get there. Now, what's the family situation like at this point in 2020?
I am
specifically
single.
Yeah.
I had bought a house. I had just, went through another nasty divorce.
Second
divorce. But at that time, my relationship with my son which had improved, had gotten rocky because of my relapse. He was pretty pissed at me.
Okay.
And I understand that. I had done a lot of work to repair that. When I want to say it was March. I want to say it was St. Patty's Day when I got, my parents were very supportive through all this. I don't know where I'd be without them. But, I got a message from my dad, because I was actually thinking about coming home from Coatesville because the program was getting ready to shut down, when I got a message from my father that my 21-year-old son, Thomas, was missing. He had been working as a Learjet pilot out in Washington, PA, and I got the message that he was missing. If there's any place to be when you get a message that your son's missing, it's in a place that you've got 9 therapists at your fingertips. But my gut told me right away that something was wrong. My son doesn't go anywhere without his cell phone. He may not answer a phone call, but he'll text you within 2 seconds. But something I knew was up right away. So I had talked to my father, I had talked to his mom, and I came home that day.
Okay. You come home and you have that helpless, horrible feeling that you just have to sit and wait. Even though I can only imagine, because you're a doer, that's the last thing you want to do. So how did you reconcile? How did you reconcile the situation? I'm sorry, that's what I meant to say. In your mind, how did this, I don't mean conclude, but I'm just saying in your mind, missing, and you knew, and you sensed, and you knew.
Well, I knew, that I was powerless and helpless at that point, that, it was a couple hours away, that there were a lot of people looking for him. Even the company he worked for had a helicopter up in the air looking for his truck where his last cell phone pinged.
Right.
And I just spent it surrounded by some people in recovery and my parents, just basically waiting for a phone call or a text, and watching all the social media posts of just, and, sometimes getting that false hope of, hey, I think I saw your son, and just, just recognizing, I think that's where, recovery came in, of recognizing those things I can't control, of just wait.
How long was the process between finding out that your son is missing and the conclusion? How long was that process?
really only about 72 hours because I can still remember March 20th, 2020 at 8:46 p.m. is when I got the phone call that my son had died by suicide.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Your choice of words, sadly, tells me that you are fluent on the subject, more fluent than I wish you were. Dear friend of mine, Andrea Farino, she was on this podcast. Her niece died by suicide, and they set up a foundation called Abby's Bakery, and she was 15. And I bring that up only in the sense that it was Andrea that taught me the died by suicide. So when I hear that, I there's first off, there's that horrific sense, oh, and you only know because you've had to endure it. But then there's also that sense that it's a much more kind way and accurate way of describing, rather than a judgment sort of thing. So, Sean, I get to see you in 2022, and I get to see you, and I watch nothing but this sort of quiet, and I do think this. I mean, I'm not saying quiet silent, but what I mean, this quiet, positive, light, dignity, compassion, caring, upbeat. I never saw you stop smiling during what I'm going to call, and you were talking about the gene sizes a while back. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, no, I don't know what that means. But I'm like, I'm going to try to slog through 30 hours. But I never see you. So the question then becomes, based on what you just said and not glossing past it, what gets you to that place over that period of time? And I know it's a process. I know there are no absolutes here in regards to finishing, and especially with grieving and loss. But what I was going to say is, what gets you to the place? Like, I'd love to hear a little bit of the work that you've chosen to do that positions you as the guy that I look at with a smile on his face constantly, kind, fun, funny, and you know what I mean, and helping a lot of people. What got you there, based now after getting that phone call at 8:46 to what I see? What got you there?
A lot of things, but I'll give the Cliff Notes version.
Sure.
The first would be people in recovery. My third phone call, actually, I called my parents, I called my brother. My third phone call was to my sponsor.
Okay.
At that time, Herren Project was doing Zoom meetings. My phone blew up with people in recovery. So it was Herren Project. They got me through it. 2 therapists, one in Coatesville and one local here. A lot of therapy, a lot of work. Fortunately or unfortunately, because of the DUI, I stayed out of jail, but I was on house arrest for a year, which was a blessing and a curse. Actually, it was, to me, I told the judge it was rather a reward, because it was the height of COVID. So the dog and I both had to stay in the yard.
Oh my God.
So the dog and I both had to stay in the yard. We both had collars on. I just happened to be on my ankle. He got shocked. It gave me the time to focus on healing without a lot of extraneous noise. It gave me the time to focus on my recovery. It gave me the time to dig back into my steps. I actually went to more meetings during COVID than I do any other time, just because there were Zoom.
Right.
I got a lot more honest with myself. Leaned on a lot more people, and when people would show up and say, "Hey, how you doing?" I wouldn't give them the "I'm fine." I'd give them the "I'm doing shitty," honestly.
Yeah.
And and it took me a while to get back into the running piece. I ended up going back up to 220 pounds.
Okay.
But every week I bought something else for my home gym, saying, "Well, tomorrow I'll do this." But, I had a lot of local people, a lot of local runners. I got into doing a lot more woodworking,
Mhm.
and but I would say it was more, probably the biggest thing was having the courage to get vulnerable, to be honest,
Mhm.
open-minded, the willingness, but gratitude,
Mm.
that practicing gratitude every day, that I get to do this. And and that's what kind of got me, through Charlie's thing is, I get to do this because I'm sober.
Yeah.
You know, I get to do it. I don't have to.
Yeah.
I could have easily stayed home and not, baked in the sun and spent 30 hours outside.
Sean, nobody would have missed us, technically, right? I mean, it would have gone on. People would have bonded with whoever. And that's the part that resonates. Sean, I meet you there. And this is to me like one of the gifts, right? So the term that I steal this term from, God rest her soul, her name was Kim. And she was somebody who I met in early sobriety. And what she said to me, because I wanted no parts of this, and it was one more accident DUI for me. And I kind of slithered in. I don't know what I was thinking, but I certainly didn't want any parts of what was being offered. But I remember saying to me early on, and it was, hey, John, you're going to see people, and you're going to see people walking around that don't drink or have stopped drinking, and they're going to look like something was taken from them. Sean, you described a while back that sense of, I think the word butthead in terms, I think that's the technical medical term that you use, but you know what I mean? In terms of the sense that I wasn't, or white knuckling or whatever, right? And then she said, John, you're also going to see people if you're lucky. And she said, if you're really lucky, you may be one of those people that you will find that this is a gift, and you will act as if something was given to you. And what I saw that weekend, and by the way, Sean, you can vouch for this, there were a lot of different ways that people chose to get the specific help. Not everybody was doing rote by the book, your step work, but a lot of people were doing a lot of different things. But here was, to me, the two absolutes. Everybody was doing something that I communicated with that was active. And I just don't mean fitness and running. I mean, it was an active sense of, you said, I practice gratitude every single day. It was these active steps. So what it did for me personally was open up my mind that there is not just one singular way to get this, but you have to be active with it. You have to be taking active steps. And the other part, that I meet you, we both get real personal, real fast. That is with every single person. As I told you, my goal when I arrived, when I'm walking across that lawn, to get to the tent, park the car, is know exactly where my car is. Because I am going to be there for a little while, and I'm going to hightail it out. And then I will be back tomorrow, and I'll find something fun to do in Havre de Grace. And stayed. And I came back. And I didn't do 30 miles like you did with your tent. And I kept looking at you like, this guy is out of his freaking mind. But then there was a bunch of other people that were doing it and did it. And the other thing that I will say that I found incredible was the sense of people were really forthright with where they were coming from. Really connecting hard and fast. And I found that about you. I really did. And what I would, one more thing, add about that weekend, as personal was getting as complete as the conversations were. Do you know what I also noticed in a weird sense? What I noticed was there wasn't one time from one person that anyone was asking about who you voted for or what are your politics. We were talking about the most personal things and all of it. And there was not one time that one person needed to share, again, who their party was, or what about this, or what I watched on CNN or Fox, and nothing. And I found that amazing. And Sean, you just said something about the woodworking. I want you to tell me, or tell us, sorry, I want you to tell us the significance of the project that you created for Charlie Engle, and that you hand delivered at the end of that 30 hours.
Okay, I'll kind of, but jumping back, that yeah, you can think about changing. It doesn't just have to do with recovery. You can think about doing a lot of things. So it's the thought that counts, but you actually got to act on it. I could think about all the work I had to do in recovery, but I actually got to do something. Whether it's changing a thought, move a muscle, change a thought, I actually have to do something. I got to call people. I got to talk to people.
Right.
But but I don't remember who I talked to, but what I loved about that weekend was the vulnerability started within the first lap of here's my story, and it just continued. It had, it didn't even necessarily have to do with, addiction or substance use, but it just continued, from right on through. And it built this bond that I came out of there with a lot of lifelong friends.
Me too.
And, I didn't, I never imagined that. And like you said, it was almost like the traditions were adhered to, that we're not going to align with any, we're not going to bitch about gas prices or,
right.
or anything like that. We're just going to go out here and we're going to, share in this suffering and share and smile about it and just take it all in. So something that I've started, I started a few years ago, is a lot of my races I'll run with an American flag. And I typically, when I first started this, I would then present it to a veteran, run with it in honor of somebody or in memory of somebody. And, I've given, flags, like Pam Rickard has one. I have one that I'm getting ready to send out to David Clark's girlfriend, Courtney. Chris and Heather Herren have one, but I've kind of lost track of how many I've done. But Charlie is somebody I have looked up to for 6 years. There's a lot of freedom behind that flag, and just there's a lot of freedom in recovery. A Herren Project guy who was supposed to come down, but unforeseen circumstances, he wasn't able to make it to Ashley. He works for a lumber company and is they're kind enough to let me have the rejects from their pile. So I had built a display case for Charlie. I told him that I was bringing a flag to run with for David, but I had already had a certificate printed up saying a certificate of authenticity, saying this flag was flown during the Penguin. Because my experience in the military is these were flown at bases and sent back to politicians who, were so far removed from things. But to me, Charlie is a guy, when it comes to recovery and helping people, is in the trenches. To me, he's deserving of that flag.
Yes.
So unbeknownst to him, I did run the first lap with that flag, and then I folded it up and I put it into the case and had it framed. And then I ran a little more with the other flag for David, and I wanted to surprise Charlie with it. And to me, it was just a way of honoring the work that he does and who he is as a person. It was handmade in the, that's actually, typically I buy the flag cases, but this one I wanted to build, and I learned how to build it. And so Charlie got my first handmade one.
What I found the most beautiful, and the case was beautiful and the setup was beautiful, it was the emotion of it. So what I came to realize, and now you've just helped paint the picture for me, was there's nothing about you. And I watched the emotion from the presentation, and there's nothing about you that to me feels like you're stuffing in anything, that you don't have up walls, you don't have the armor at all. And I think it's such a powerful thing. So when you were talking about being a leader earlier and not believing it, but you were thrust in those situations, do you believe more in yourself now?
Definitely. When you mentioned that, I I lost track of how many times just during that embrace that Charlie and I had up there that I love you was said between the two of us.
Mhm.
I've recently, it took me, I'll be turning 49 here in a couple of weeks, but it took
Jesus.
me probably,
Okay.
it took me,
Good.
it probably, it took me 48 years, I think, to actually feel comfortable in my own skin and to have
Mhm.
the confidence in myself.
Mm.
It's been a long, slow process.
Well, here's the hope for me, because there's no guarantees on anything in terms of how much more or how much longer and all that stuff, and you've lived that. But my hope is that there's a ton more years that you get to inspire other people, because honest to God, you inspire me. I'm just grateful that you get to enjoy that sense of emotion too. Because, like I said, you carry it, you share it, you embody it. I watched it. Sean, what's the best way for people to get to you? To learn more, anything like that? I know you're active on social. I mean, we put up your social links. You cool with that?
Yeah, my Instagram is I don't remember where all the underscores are. Sober
You
Sean
don't have to.
Macmillen.
I'll have them up there. It's Sober Sean. Yeah,
Yeah,
you don't have to say it out loud, but I
yeah,
can have your Instagram.
yeah. They can find me on Facebook.
Right.
And my email is Sean, SEAN, at herrenproject.org.
So, last question for the moment. Selfish one for me, which is this. Are you still thinking of coming to Philadelphia in November?
Yeah, yes, because October I'll be running the Oil Creek 100K. So
I'm sorry,
in November,
like
Oil Creek 100K, it's out near Erie. Getting back into my ultra trail running roots.
God
And and then
process that number. But anyway, great.
but to answer your initial question, yes, myself and a number of Herren Project teammates are going to descend on the Philadelphia for the Philadelphia half marathon and the marathon, but I will be there carrying a flag through the city of brotherly love.
Yes. I love all of that. And it will be coming up with love. It will be so well received. Sean Macmillen, I am delighted that you made the time today, man. And I'm glad, I believe that you help people. I'm thrilled that you made the time and showed up for us today too. Thank you, man.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me.
100%. Folks, you've just heard another episode of Your Message Received. Keep listening, keep liking, keep sharing. iHeartMedia, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, whole bunch of other places. This is John Duffin from Duffin Media. Thanks so much for tuning in. We're thrilled to have you, and we'll talk soon. Bye.
And now, making its way across the finish line, Your Message Received has been a production of Duffin Media.